Welcome to this lecture on format, composition, and style. Let's jump in. So, format is the way in which something is arranged or set out. Composition is the selection of the elements using the principles of design. And style is a distinctive appearance typically determined by the principles according to which something is designed. Now, let's look at this a little more closely. I just always like to start off with definitions, even though I don't know about you guys, but I'm a highly visual person, and I can't understand something unless I can see it. But it does help to make sure we're on the same page and that we're talking about the same thing, because format and composition often get used interchangeably in our society. They're not really the exact same thing, but I use them interchangeably just because of the fact that it's how it is. However, so all that to say, I suspect a lot of you all are the same way. So we're now going to talk about this visually. Okay, format is the way in which something is arranged or set out. These 9 cubes are formatted in 3 different arrangements. So they're formatted 3 different ways. Now, the word format can also refer to that extension of a file. Format can refer to a lot of different things. But mostly when we talk about format in our context, we're talking about the way in which something is arranged or put out or put together. All right. In this case, each of these 3 different arrangements, these 3 different formats have the same exact elements, but they're formatted differently. They're arranged differently. Okay. Now, composition is where we select the elements and the principles of design. The 9 cubes are formatted the same. They are composed in 3 different ways, right? So they have the exact same shapes laid out in the exact same format, but the formats are composed using different applications of color. Well, and line. The first 2 obviously are solid. The last one's just an outline. Okay, and so there's the difference between format. Format is location, placement. Composition is the application of the principles and the elements. And so we both, whenever we're working in design, we format and compose. We end up doing both of these things. But they are different. Okay, and so then style is a distinctive appearance that is determined by the principles according to which something is designed. For example, these 9 cubes are styled in 3 different ways. They're all formatted the same way, but they each have their own appearance. And that appearance, that style, is something that you can take the principles of elements chart and fill that out. And the style then becomes those elements and those principles that then gets applied to different works of the same style. And the ones in the middle are pop art. And so pop art has a very clear, distinctive style. And then as a result of style becomes a genre. And we're going to look a little bit more at some of these. We kind of talked about it, but okay. So format, composition, and style applied to each of the different ones, different ways. So these are formatted, composed, and styled. You can see that they're arranged differently. They have the principles and elements applied differently, and they have different styles. Styles are also cohesive. They're unifying. And we'll get more into unity in the principles. It's really hard to teach principles and elements of design because they are not truly independent, but you kind of have to isolate them in order to explain what they are. Okay, so you could just throw everything on the page. And trust me, some people do. But no one's going to pay you for that because they can do that for themselves for free. So professional quality design looks like someone invested a lot of time in it and followed the principles of elements of design. And in our case, our work always looks like it's laid out on a grid. The wonderful Rob Platt of Habitations LLC has just given me some of his construction documents to share with you all and show you. And I'm going to do that at the end of this. It'll be the last video in this lecture series. I'm going to show you beautifully formatted and composed construction documents. Because one of the difficulties I've seen over the years with getting students to understand the importance of how you lay out your drawings on the page is every bit as important as what you have laid out on the page. Because at the end of the day, if it's not legible, it's going to be difficult to build. And for those of you who have not yet been through that process, I assure you, nobody likes change orders. In fact, when I was in the field and I'd mess something up, the contractor would call me and say, okay, this doesn't work. And I would just go, what do you think we should do? And they'd be like, well, and they make a suggestion. And if it worked, I'd be like, all right, let me sketch this out. I'd be like, okay, you know what? Do that. And, they didn't want a change order. I didn't want a change order. We just fixed it. And so it's really important to understand that the cleaner and the neater, the better formatted your drawings are, your documents are, the easier they are going to be to read and therefore build, and therefore, when problems do come up, they're easier to fix. Because change orders, most of the time, cost your clients money, and that's why nobody wants to do them. So grids don't have to be regular grids. There's a regular grid graph paper, right? Y'all know what that's like. However, grids really do help keep your work clean. A grid should have a pattern, and it can be an irregular pattern, but it should nonetheless be some sort of pattern that you're working with. It's really interesting. I noticed that I did not care about arrangement until I studied design, until I started practicing it. And now, for me, it's imperative that everything is arranged, or I know it's not right just because it's been so drilled into me. And so I will probably drill it all into you all as well. Okay, so grids basically give order design. They also make it easier because then you know where to put things, right? So if you look at the one on the left, that is laid out not with a grid, so it doesn't quite feel like it works. Versus the one on the right where you've aligned it on a grid, and then when you remove the grid, it will look like it was professionally designed and laid out. And there's a great example over here on the right of how you can work off grid, or even if you have a weird grid. But nonetheless, there's still a grid, and that, as a result, very much helps define good, strong design. So grids will bring organization not just to the design itself, but to the process of creating design. It really does speed up your time. So say you want to create a poster for a lecture series, or you're putting together a presentation document for a potential client to see a job you did. And you have all these photos and drawings and documents, and you all will actually take a class learning a little bit of Photoshop and Illustrator, because I used it all the time when I was an architect. It really helps make great presentations. So, working on a strong grid really does help make your design look well formatted, well composed, and easy to read. Okay, so grids give you a great roadmap. So don't be afraid to use them. Rule of thirds. In design, we use the rule of thirds. It helps us know where to lay things out. It's kind of, it's effective, right? So you see both of these are examples. They worked with that rule of thirds, and as a result, the design is very well balanced. So if you're ever at a point where you're looking at your composition, whether it's an elevation or a presentation document you're putting together, consider using the rule of thirds. Move some things around, move them to those thirds points or on those thirds lines, and it helps balance them out. So if you don't have a point of interest in your design, people won't really stay and look at it very long. So pretend you're designing an apartment complex. And as I talk about a lot, how do people know how to get in? How do you get them in the front door? How could you format the building to meet this criteria? How could you compose the building as well, right? That red door is composition. Where it's located is format. What color it is composition and style. And we're going to get into the principles. I know we haven't covered them in great detail. We just sort of did an overview so you would have an idea of what I was talking about when I was talking about these things. But, balance is really, really important to formatting. And so it's something we're going to talk about in more detail next after this. You've heard about complementary colors, but what about complementary design elements? And that's another one. How do you do this, right? So if you look at the photo of the house here, more like almost the size of a mansion. It's interesting. What would qualify as a mansion in modern terms? I don't actually know the question that. Look it up though. Elements in this format are unified through their style. Right? So it's a modernized version of prairie style architecture. There's a clean horizontality, meaning the elements are very horizontal. That's applied to the entire structure. And that's what we're talking about, complementary elements. So when you're using more than one image or more than one element in your composition, try to make sure they look effective and cohesive when grouped together through the application of unity, which we will also discuss. The easiest way to offend white space is to refer, or negative space, is to refer to it as empty space. Emptiness implies that it should be full of something and that's not doing its job. White space can actually help make your design look better. So that is something else to consider, right? Make sure that you don't crowd everything onto the page or crowd everything onto the elevation. Make sure there's some positive space and negative space. You want to balance those things out. These are just all good rules for good formatting. Repetition is really good, is really important in not only page layouts, but planning. All of this also applies to when we start working with planning, formatting. You have to format your plan. So it's really important to understand how to format well. Okay, I'm going to stop here and we will continue in the next video.